everybody, to our Parrot Stars podcast. My name is Alexis Highland. I am the manager at Parrot Stars, and I'm joined here today by Ashley and Avery, who both work with me at Parrot Stars. And we've got Lucky, my blue-headed Pyonis, behind us, eating his Nutriberries as usual.
Hi, Lucky.
And the dogs running around being their usual needy selves. So we are talking today about clicker training, and we wanted this episode to kind of be a summary or a recap to our previous 3 conversations where we talked about the importance of positive reinforcement training and how to use clicker training as a tool to improve the relationship you have with your companion parrot. And I think we all kind of felt that as we were going through those episodes, they were very conversational. And I really liked the format that we chose to kind of introduce the topic, because it's such a heavy topic full of so many different points of view and opinions. So we wanted this episode today to kind of be just a very concise summary of what we talked about in those episodes. So you guys can jump back to those previous 3 episodes if you want to learn a little bit more in a little bit more detail about each of the points that we're going to talk about today. And of course, if you guys ever have questions, you can reach out to us, either send us an email or comment on social media, because we're happy to kind of dive into things in more detail if there's things that you want explained a little bit further. All right, so let's just dive into it.
So just starting off with clicker training is just important to be patient.
Yeah.
That's just the whole name of the game with it.
Yep. So number 1, be patient.
Right. Yeah.
Number 2, define and understand positive reinforcement training. So positive reinforcement training is a behavior modification technique that increases the likelihood that a desired behavior is going to be repeated and you're rewarding it. So basically, an example of that would be offering your parrot a treat for immediately after a behavior that you want it to do again. So if you liked that it took a step towards you and you offered it a treat, that would be what we consider positive reinforcement training.
And this is different than positive punishment, which we define as a behavior modification technique that involves adding an undesirable consequence after seeing an unwanted behavior in the attempt to make it less likely to happen again. Just a reminder, this is not something we recommend. We're all about positive reinforcement, not positive punishment. An example of this type of training model would be flicking the beak of the parrot, shouting at them after a behavior we don't want repeated, spraying them with water to disrupt behavior. These would be examples of positive punishment, things we don't really want to bring to the table when we're working with our birds.
Yeah, and I think one little piece of it is not to confuse how the subtlety of how you're saying things might be misinterpreted by your parrot. So example again of positive punishment would be saying something like no, or no bite, or don't, or stop it. But unless you were drastically changing the tone of your voice, your parrot actually might interpret that as positive reinforcement.
Yeah.
Right.
Because you're using your voice, and our whole goal here is to try to make our voice something that the bird perceives as a positive. So a lot of times when we're doing positive reinforcement training, we're also saying good job, good baby, good bird.
Yeah.
So just be careful when you guys are starting to learn and understand the difference between positive reinforcement and positive punishment. Make sure that your positive reinforcement training is really reinforcement of good behaviors, and you're not accidentally reinforcing unwanted behaviors.
So after understanding that you need to be patient and then understanding the definition of these main training strategies is, of course, just to assess your actual situation at home.
Yes.
So your bird's point of view, are you working with a little baby bird? Or you have a 30-year-old bird? Is your bird maybe a little more nervous, a little more shy than maybe a really outgoing bird? If you are working with a bird that is maybe got passed to you for whatever reason, or you rescued a bird. Maybe learn a little bit about their history, maybe what things they went through, so that way you can make it as comfortable of an environment, but also understand the bird the best you can.
Absolutely.
And once you kind of have, a background for your bird and you're prepared, whether it's a baby, we might have shorter training sessions. Or if it's a very nervous bird, we might curb our goals a little bit. But once you kind of have the parrot's point of view, our next step is going to be really preparing our quote unquote toolbox. And we'll kind of break that down a little bit more. But this starts as simply as your cage and your enclosure, having the appropriate size. We want it to be large enough for the bird and roomy that they can, move about and play with very enriching toys, having dynamic perches of different types of materials, ensuring that they have a good diet. All of these are really important components of our first tool, which is an appropriate cage and enclosure.
Yeah, and that's something we talked about in the last 3 episodes, and we wanted to kind of summarize here is the value of really understanding what tools are in your toolbox when you're trying to start positive reinforcement training with your bird. So yes, the environment, the actual physical cage that it's in is huge. But a huge part of reinforcement training are treats. So kind of assessing and evaluating what motivates your parrot. So very often that's going to be seeds, nuts, or dried fruit. Might take a little experimentation to figure out exactly what the biggest incentivizer is for your individual parrot. But you want to maybe reserve those special treats for your training sessions specifically. So a good example would be walnuts, pine nuts, maybe for smaller species, sunflower kernels or safflower kernels. But you want to make sure you have those treats prepped and ready before every single training session.
Absolutely. And a reminder that you don't want that accessible in the cage all day long, because then it's not as special of a reward.
Right. Yummy treats. So getting your ducks in a row or your parrots in a row, just to add to the toolbox to just prepare yourself for your future training would, of course, have a clicker accessible, have your target stick ready, and we strongly encourage having a training stand, or we call it a T-stand, just a plain old perch on a rod, very low distraction for your bird. So those are the main tools that you would want to have at the ready so you can begin that training process.
Absolutely. And I think we want to maybe highlight that all of what we've just talked about is all with the intention of this is stuff to understand before you're even starting your training.
Right.
So when you've kind of assessed kind of where your parrot's at, what's your starting point, having your toolbox ready, making sure you understand just the concepts of the training, now you're ready to just start planning. So it's kind of, I know it's a lot and we're really trying to encourage people to slow down and think about it from all different angles, but we really want you to kind of understand the concepts first. So now we're going to dive into just planning your session. So we're not even to the point where we're starting our training yet. We're just still in the kind of beginning stages where we're wanting to start clicker training, but we want to make sure we're totally prepped and ready. And I think one of the most valuable things you can do when you're planning your training sessions is schedule when you want to have them with your parrot. So probably not a great idea to do it right after the bird has just eaten breakfast or you've just gave it a treat or a foraging reward. So ideally you want your training sessions to be as close to when the bird is hungriest as you can manage. So first thing in the morning is a great opportunity to do some clicker training, but there isn't a right or wrong way to do this. So depending on what your work schedule is or what your family time is like, have it be functional for you first in a time where you're feeling really good and calm and settled, and then try to have that stay relatively consistent if you can, so your parrot starts to understand, oh, mom or dad are about to start some training. They get used to the idea of when you're trying to do these more intentional training sessions.
Yeah. And I think once you kind of start looking at what the schedule is going to be like, the next thing you want to do is check in with yourself,
Mm-hmm.
assess how you're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because if we aren't in a calm, confident state of mind, training might not go the way we hope. I know we're all human here. I'm guilty of it too. Trying to push through a training session where maybe I felt frustrated or a little bit, discouraged, and it is just counterproductive. When I've had those moments, the bird is not really receptive to what I'm asking it to do,
Mm-hmm.
and then it just kind of creates a feedback loop where maybe we as the humans start to get a little more frustrated. So really check in with yourself, assess your mindset, make sure you're in a really good place, positive attitude,
Mm-hmm.
motivated. These are things that are going to set us up for success too.
Mm-hmm.
In a similar way, we also want to assess our environment,
Mm-hmm.
making sure we minimize distractions to the best of our ability. Um, Making sure it's a very calm, stress-free environment, whether, that's happens to be where the bird's cage is, or if we have to move into a
Mm-hmm.
quieter area of the home, but just kind of
That's
minimizing
true.
those distractions.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So before we do get started, we have all those tools. We are assessing the environment and all the variables there. But now we can maybe plan our actual session.
Mm-hmm.
So we can determine what goals we're maybe shooting for, but
Mm-hmm.
not really setting expectations,
Mm-hmm.
just what we're hoping to achieve that time and be okay with whatever isn't achieved. Simply just taking a treat.
Yep.
Or if you're further along, maybe just reinforcing the step up, but we'll talk about that later. But not only planning and goaling, but setting a timer,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're first getting started. And of course, we recommend this time for seasoned positive reinforcement trainers, but 3 to 5 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
simply because based off our experience, what we've found 3 to 5 minutes is usually when the bird is kind of disassociating from the training session because they either get bored or they just want to move on to something else to keep themselves occupied. And so that's why we found the time being with best results, 3 to 5 minutes.
Yeah. And I think maybe just keeping a little written journal or a journal on your phone so that you can record those goals and
Right.
have them be something that you can refer back to at the end of your training session is going to be really helpful. And then, yeah, having the timer on your phone, if you're doing that, maybe your phone's not a distraction while you're doing it. It's just simply being used as a timer.
Mhm.
But having the timer like visible so that you can like really see, okay, it's been 1 minute and kind of get a feel of like how quickly 3 to 5 minutes passes. Cause I think it's easy to like get to that 5 minute mark and be like, oh my gosh, now I have to stop. But when you're kind of mentally preparing yourself that this is going to be a short session, it's going to help you feel more encouraged that when you're stopping, it's not because you failed or you didn't
Mhm.
get where you needed to be. It's simply because the timer stopped.
I
Right.
like that you mentioned a journal too. I'm always telling folks record your observations, record your goals. It
Mm-hmm.
helps us maybe to see the progress because sometimes when you're really in the training, we don't notice the small accomplishments, which are really huge ones. And
Mm-hmm.
then, maybe we had ambitious goals and we have to dial it back. So I'm really glad you mentioned that too. It's an important tool to have in your toolbox.
Yeah. And I think just the ability to end on a positive is
Yes.
not something people should take for granted. So we're suggesting this 3 to 5 minute time frame because parrots are highly intelligent
Hmm.
and they're very curious. So their patience to stay focused on one particular thing is pretty short. So
Hmm.
they often are like exploring new things or they get bored very easily. So the 3 to 5 minutes is to kind of protect your training session from going in like a weird direction or from you getting really frustrated. But it doesn't mean that you have to use that entire 3 to 5 minutes.
Yes.
Right.
So if you're just in the planning stages and you're like, okay, I'm just trying to get started with my companion parrot. If I even just get 1 good minute, and it's a really good minute and you feel really calm and relaxed and you can tell that the parrot is really calm and relaxed, it's okay to end there too.
Hmm.
So really being observer to yourself and your parrot throughout that training session, and having the foresight to be able to say, if I have a solid interaction with this parrot that I feel really good about, let's stop there, so that the likelihood that we can pick up where we left off with the next training session is going to be a lot easier. Because I think we as humans, myself included, have this tendency to kind of just push that little extra bit, and then it might go a direction that we weren't really hoping for. So again, think about your interactions before you have them. Sometimes just visualizing the training session before you even get started might really help you. Picture yourself doing the training, picture the bird accepting the treat from you. All of these things are going to be worth your time and your effort before you get started with your training. So if you're just getting started with a companion parrot, or you're resetting with an existing parrot you've had for a long time, you may need to really slow down the process and start from the very beginning. So maybe we're not even to the point where we're starting positive reinforcement training. Maybe you just need to desensitize the bird to your presence. So maybe we need to start there.
Yeah, and again, that's why it's important to kind of assess your bird's mindset, because in my opinion, arguably one of the hardest parts of training is when it's a brand new bird or an inherited bird with trauma, because as eager as we are to start that training process, take it slow. And it's the hardest part, because we're excited, we're invested, we already love this bird. The bird isn't there just yet. So starting slow, and like you said, maybe we're not even picking up those tools yet. This is a point where it would be really important to get the bird acclimated with us. We're not even going to be standing in front of the cage. We're going to, get a chair or something where we can remain seated in a non-threatening pose, and slowly moving that chair or whatever it may be closer to the cage over time. It really gives the bird the chance to observe us, to see that we aren't threatening. And this requires a ton of patience. But it sets that foundation, like we've talked about in previous episodes, for trust and for kind of a fear-free training session.
Like what we said, patience is the name of the game.
Yes.
And this isn't something that just you do for one day and then dive into, especially like what Ashley was saying, if it is a brand new little baby parrot, maybe a little nervous, this might take a week plus. You just kind of living in the environment that your bird is in, and you aren't really pushing your bird in any way. So that's important.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point to remind everybody that we as humans are predatory by nature, and we have a lot of predatory features on our body that make us look and feel very intimidating to a parrot that is a prey animal. So prey animals are going to instinctually be very guarded and very defensive of themselves.
Right.
So by really neutralizing the room and making sure your parrot is just getting used to your presence is going to help them realize that as you continue to approach the cage and you're starting to move the chair closer, it's not something that they need to stay in a really heightened state for. So what you want to try to watch for, like Avery was mentioning, it might take a week. How you're going to know if you're ready to like move the chair another foot closer, or if you've moved the chair to the point where it's all the way up to the cage, the way that you're going to assess that is by reading the bird's body language. So you should be sitting in the chair very neutral. But if you're going to move to the next stage, the parrot should look very neutral also, basically indifferent to your presence. So it might start playing with a toy, it might start eating, it might start preening. Those would be all signals that the bird is putting its guard down, that it's not on high alert. So you're able to take that and don't exploit it. Like, don't just like, oh, it started to preen, let me like dive into the clicker training. Like, you want to really say, okay, I see it starting to settle. It obviously isn't threatened in this moment. we're going to inch the chair a little bit closer. So that would be kind of how you evaluate whether or not the bird is ready for that next stage, is kind of how relaxed it appears to be inside its cage.
And on the other side of what you were saying, just because simply we get a lot of questions about those behaviors that maybe show that the bird is not comfortable. So, of course, the relaxation, the playing, the preening, that stuff is great. But maybe if you are sitting next to your bird, and this happens in the visit room at the store, new birds, people are very excited to start working with their new bird. But maybe the bird's eyes are very wide. Maybe he's looking all around the environment for ways of escape. Maybe he literally just moves away if you were sit there or like try to move a little closer, which is okay. I mean, that's a part of the process, but maybe it's just an indicator. Just maybe take a deep breath and go a little bit slower. So that's just what I wanted to point out, because a lot of people do ask about that.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Seeing both sides, the relaxed state and the nervous state, for sure. And I think the reason that the cage is such an important tool in your toolbox of starting your positive reinforcement training is because the elephant in the room is that nobody wants to be bit by their companion parrot, nor does your parrot probably want to be put in a position where it feels it has to bite you. So the cage is going to be this like very neutral way of creating a physical barrier between yourself and the parrot. And it's allowing you both to build a mutual amount of trust while basically eliminating any chance that you may get nipped or bit when you didn't mean to, because you have a physical barrier between you. So after you've kind of inched your chair towards the parrot and you can tell that the parrot is very desensitized to your presence in the room, you're going to take a big giant treat, because remember, we're going to have those ready and available before we start the training session. So very often we use like the halved walnuts because they're big and they're soft, and most parrots really like walnuts. And you're just holding it between your index finger and thumb and just barely putting it through the cage bars. Your fingers more or less should be on the outside of the cage. They shouldn't really be entering the space inside the cage. So basically the parrot cannot reach you. So if you have a bird that's very conditioned to be defensive, okay, so maybe this isn't a baby bird, this is an adult bird that you're trying to reset with, or you've just taken on an adult bird as an adoption, they might have a very conditioned response to somebody putting their hand up to the cage. So yes, you're trying to allow the parrot to be an active participant in the process, but by just totally starting very, very slow and intentional, holding the treat up to the cage bar, you're going to allow the parrot to choose to take the treat without putting yourself at any risk that things could go awry and a nip or a bite could happen.
And the big treat helps us gain confidence along with the bird too, because if perhaps we had been bitten by that bird before, if we're trying to reset, or if we have a strong fear of being bit, because no one really wants to experience that, we also have the confidence of knowing that this huge treat is giving us a buffer, so we're less likely to shy away when the bird is coming up to us. Because if we start to kind of pull the treat back or shy away, our body language is going to be read loud and clear by that bird. And a bird that was maybe starting to gain some confidence might get guarded too, because why are you pulling away? What do we need to be nervous about? So it's very strategic having that larger treat.
So after we've gotten to the point where we have been offering treats, through the bars, just getting your bird used to you, getting your bird known to its favorite treats, we can start introducing the tool that should have already been laid out.
Present,
the clicker. And what the clicker is, just to redefine, is just a small box, device, rectangle, whatever, that is simply to make a clicking noise. That is the actual tool. It's very simple. It makes a distinct noise that you can use to your advantage during your positive reinforcement training.
And And something cool about the clicker too is that, especially in a home where there's multiple family members, if everyone wants to participate in training, like you said, it's a distinct sound. So no matter who's holding it, who's doing the training, the sound is the same. So the bird is going to respond very similarly with each trainer. Um, but it does make a distinct sound. So if we have a bird that's never been exposed to the clicker or is easily
Mhm.
startled, we want to be cautious how we introduce it. If it's a brand new clicker, it might be a little stiff and make a much louder sound than after it's broken in. So strategies for introducing this, you could have the clicker behind your back to start, or
Mhm.
even in a pocket. That way the sound is a little bit muffled. That way we can introduce it gradually without startling our bird and kind of disrupting some of that progress we've made.
Yeah, and if you've already attempted to introduce the clicker and you're restarting, don't get discouraged based on past experiences. So sometimes the feedback we get at the store is my bird is terrified of the clicker. And like Ashley just mentioned, it's okay to start the desensitization process over again. So yes, maybe we flubbed it in the past or it was introduced too harshly or abruptly, but the sound can be a little intimidating. That's the point. It's supposed to be a sound that the bird isn't going to hear through the course of the regular day. And it's distinctly different than your talking voice, which again might not be as distinct enough to signal the bird that it's doing positive reinforcement training. So don't get discouraged if it hasn't been successful in the past. The idea here is that you can always reset and rebuild at any point, regardless of what the past experience has been. So now we have a parrot that's in its nice enclosure where the bird is used to our presence around the cage. We've assessed that what its favorite treat is. We have it kind of accepting the treats from our hands in a very casual way. Now we know what the actual clicker is. And now we're ready to actually use the clicker as a tool as part of our positive reinforcement training. And we kind of talked a lot in the last 3 episodes kind of about clicker training and positive reinforcement training. And what we kind of want to do in this conversation is remind our listeners that this is a very well established, well researched part of animal behavior.
Hmm.
There are entire schools and programs dedicated just to positive reinforcement training. So, we're going to encourage our listeners to invest in themselves and continue to do their research on positive reinforcement training. Because we're going to talk about the purpose of the clicker and we're going to introduce another tool, the target stick, here in a little bit. And there's so much that needs to be learned and understood about positive reinforcement training that we don't really want to discourage our listeners if we start going into kind of more complex definitions. There's so much information already out there that's very easy to digest and understand, probably better than maybe we can present to you in this podcast of 30 to 40 minutes. So we can encourage you to do some positive reinforcement research on your own. But basically, the clicker is a device to mark the moment a behavior has been done that you want the bird to repeat. So, again, positive reinforcement, offering a reward for a behavior that you want the animal to do again. So, taking a treat from our hand is a good behavior. We like that. We want the bird to repeat it. And what we're trying to do is create an association between that positive moment of taking the treat and a sound that distinctly marks that that was a good behavior. So the click is meant to be introduced in a very specific way to signal the bird that that moment was the moment it did something correctly or well. So to visualize, you're standing in front of the cage. You've got a treat in one hand, you've got your clicker in the other hand. By holding your hand up to the cage and allowing the parrot to come choose to take the treat out of your hand, you're building confidence within your parrot and within yourself that, again, this behavior is a good thing. It's going to result in a good thing for the parrot. So if your parrot has a fear of hands, or maybe we moved too quickly when we first brought it home, and rather than making a positive gesture towards your hand, your parrot often shies away from your hand. Starting at this slow of a pace is going to help the bird realize, okay, moving towards that human hand is a good thing for me. So the moment it touches the treat or accepts the treat out of your hand, that is the exact moment that you want to click the clicker. Okay. So unintentionally or intentionally, there is going to be a link or an association made in the bird's brain between hearing that sound and receiving a reward. So that cannot be taken lightly. You really want to solidify what that clicker represents. So this is where you need to really take it slow and have a lot of repetition in the next few days of your training sessions. Don't get discouraged or feel like you're not making progress if you take 5 to 7 days just to consistently reinforce that that click sound means that a treat is being offered. The whole concept here is that we're trying to signal to the bird the exact moment that something good is happening. Okay. So that as we continue our clicker training sessions or our positive reinforcement training sessions, now when we're starting to complicate things and add different elements to the training, even if we don't have a treat ready in our hand, if the parrot hears the click, it's still going to make the connection that the behavior that it just did was a good thing, that it's going to be rewarded for. So now we click and make a sound to mark a behavior so that the bird knows that, hey, a treat is on its way. So it's creating a bridge between the time gap of that was the behavior I want you to do right there. And now I'm reaching into my pocket, getting you the treat, and the treat is coming. So again, it's a tool to help really make it very clear to the parrot the exact moment it's doing a behavior that it's going to be rewarded for. So again, there's lots of content on how to really understand the concepts of positive reinforcement training. But I think it's just to kind of neutralize yourself, really slow things down. And it's just like a good start to positive reinforcement training. You got to teach the bird what the clicker is, teach it that it's a good thing. And then little by little, we'll start adding elements to now use it as a way to create a better relationship and build more trust with your companion parrot.
And to reinforce for especially customers that have been using a clicker is the timing of the actual click. Just to quickly say that the click should be as soon as possible that you can get it to the behavior that the bird was doing, excuse me. So an equation form, behavior times click in parentheses plus reward. I guess you could say equal reward, but I don't know if that's the way you want to visualize it, but it has to be as close to the behavior as possible to make that association that what you were talking about.
Yes, that's a really good point. So I think when you've already made the association with like click and treat at the exact moment that it takes its treat, that time lag is important. And I think I was going to mention this in the next step, but I think it's a good point to mention it now. Practice your training sessions not in front of your bird. So like the physicality of doing training, if you're not used to doing it, it can be a little awkward. And literally, like if the box is upside down in your hand, the clicker training box, like or the clicker box, like it won't click. So like,
Right.
if you just have been waiting for 30 minutes to get this bird to take this treat from your hand and you go to click it and it's the wrong direction and it doesn't click.
Even at the
Now what are
store,
we gonna do?
I try to show customers what it sounds like quickly, and I start pressing on
The
it.
wrong
Oh
side.
God, it's not working. So that's a
Yeah,
good point.
so really taking the time to like get used to the objects that you're using in your training session are going to be really valuable. And again, it's an exciting process. And you're trying to remember a million different things all at once. And sometimes, like, even myself, like, I'm like, oh, like I was so excited that she did what I wanted her to do that I didn't click at the moment that I was supposed to. So yeah, having that intense presence of mind and really knowing, okay, I gotta be ready. I've gotta have the clicker in my hand ready to go is going to be really, really important.
And I think it's so important to be prepared with our clicker, make sure it's facing the right direction. And then the reminder too that this is supposed to give the bird clarity during training. So click, reward, click, reward. We want to make sure that if our thumb slips on that clicker or we miss the moment, that we don't start clicking arbitrarily or after the fact, because that bird is expecting that reward. And then if we click too late and then we start offering a reward, it kind of ruins that clarity. The bird isn't going to have a moment marked. It's just going to have like heard the click and then we kind of have to reward them. So really important, like you guys were saying, be ready and like very attentive to that moment we want to mark with them.
I think one more thing, not to bog it down, but something I've noticed, especially personally, is we can't kind of neglect the fact that this training process, like what you were saying, Alexis, is really rewarding for not just the bird, but literally the bird, but you as well. Because once you do start to have a routine and you do get really well at the clicker, it's such a simple topic or thing to do, but you got to get used to it. But this is the type of thing that like world famous animal behavioralists and world famous, like, Steve Irwin did clicker training with, crocodiles probably.
Yeah.
So this is I don't know, I guess you can just feel fancy when you do it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, that's the cool thing is that, yes, it's a topic with a lot of information. We're encouraging you to do the research on your own, but it can be done by anybody.
Yes.
It is not this like really complex thing that you need to go to school for years and years. Yes, there is huge benefit to investing in yourself and really understanding the concepts, but little wins. I think we talked about that in the last episodes. Just making realistic goals and like feeling that like that success, like that's a win, guys. We can get to the more fancy stuff down the road, but just introducing the clicker productively is a huge win. Just getting a parrot to take a treat out of a predatory hand is a win.
Absolutely.
That's a really, really good thing.
And as we're getting more comfortable with the clicker and our parrots getting more comfortable with the clicker, understanding that moment marked in time, us bridging the gap in time with our reward, we'll want to start making the pieces of our treat and reward a little bit smaller over time. Awesome to start with that big treat for the reasons we described earlier on. But as we progress, we do want to start making the treats a little bit smaller. That way we can repeat over and over that behavior, that training method with them. If we have a giant treat every time we're clicker training, those 3 to 5 minutes pass really quickly. The bird kind of fills up really quickly. So we want to, as we get more comfortable and the bird does, start having our treats be a little bit smaller so that we can quickly repeat those behaviors and not fill our bird up right away and they don't have the appetite or incentive to keep training with us.
Totally.
So, if you're still with us, the next tool, once we've established the clicker, just like what Ashley was saying, what we've talked about this past few minutes or so more, is the target stick. Now, the target stick is literally just a stick.
Mm-hmm.
It could be, compared to a chopstick. Could be a target stick can be a chopstick if that's what you have at home. And just like what we did with the clicker, to define what it actually is just a stick that you use to direct your bird's movements.
Mm-hmm.
There's no other description besides a stick.
Yep.
I don't know what else to say.
No, that's the idea here is we're doing the point by point
Right.
summary of a topic that took us 3 episodes to
Yes.
get through. So yes, it's literally just the stick that you're going to encourage the parrot to touch.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the way you use the target stick to guide your parrot's movements is first teaching the bird that if it moves towards the stick and then touches it, it's going to be rewarded for that behavior. So, again, the physicality of introducing the target stick to yourself needs to be done before you introduce the target stick to the bird. So now we have 3 things that we're literally sometimes juggling in our hands. We've got a clicker, we've got a target stick, and then we have the actual food treat that you're going to present to the bird. So there, again, are ways of doing research and seeing the physicality of it. But you can start by having a stick in one hand, the clicker in the other hand, and maybe you have your treats in like a treat pouch on your body, or you have a little cup of treats handy. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
we don't want our treats off on a table or out of our immediate grasp, because even though we've just explained that the clicker is a bridge for the time gap between the moment it did something right and heard the click, with us actually physically reaching for a treat and presenting it, that gap still can't be very long. It's
Mm-hmm.
still got to have a quick turnover. So practice using the clicker in your hand away from the bird before you introduce it to the bird. Now, parrots are innately curious creatures. Okay, and most chopsticks are made of wood, so they've already hopefully gotten used to the idea that they can like touch wood objects pretty successfully. Some of them are acrylic and are colorful, but again, that's with the intention that it kind of sparks the bird's interest. So again, this is the readiness component. Have the clicker ready, because the first time you slowly put that clicker, or excuse me, that target stick up to the cage bars, because remember, the bird is still inside the cage at this time. And the moment that bird uses that little bit of curiosity to reach out and touch that target stick for the first time, you've got to have the clicker ready to click at the exact moment that the bird's beak touches the target stick.
Mm-hmm.
So make sure you're taking it slow. You're being a conscientious observer to your own actions so that you're ready to really introduce the target stick with meaning and intention to create that relationship right away.
I mean, then just to reinforce that point you just said, because again, and we try to explain this to a lot of customers about this whole process of when to click, is you're not just clicking as soon as the gold behavior is like accomplished.
Mm.
So you're not waiting for the bird to fully run over and take the treat. And great job, you did the whole thing right there. And that's when you only get a treat. It's every little, and sometimes literally, step the bird does take to move towards these behaviors you want to achieve deserves a click and then reward.
Totally. And I think the visualization of that, because we're in a podcast format, is really valuable. So say we've successfully gotten the parrot to take the treats and we're doing the clicker. Okay. Now we're ready to do the target stick. Maybe you have a parrot that like isn't naturally curious about the target stick and is instead nervous and is retreating away from the target stick. So what Avery was just describing was, okay, say we lift that target stick up to the cage bars and the bird just sits still. And you're like, okay, not really what we were hoping for. Okay. So maybe we hold the treat up on the other side of the target stick. And now all of a sudden the parrot talks banging into the cameras. Oh my God. So maybe the parrot just takes one step towards the target stick. That it is okay to click at that moment.
Yes.
Okay. So we're, again, laying a foundation. We're building the parrot's behavior. So yes, it is totally okay that if we don't introduce the target stick and the bird touches it the first time, that is okay too. You can also click and reward for any positive motion towards the target stick.
Yeah. So not literally every step that the bird is taking towards, but just like if it is a very slow
process,
nervous
yeah.
process, that's what I mean. But anyways.
Okay, so once we've kind of gotten the bird acclimated with the target, they are successfully moving towards it, ideally touching it. We can start to encourage more movement towards us, towards the target. For myself, I usually pair the word touch with the target just to kind of reiterate to the bird, I want them to touch this. And once they're doing that, we can start putting the target between the bars through different areas of the cage, maybe opposite where the bird is standing, to get them to physically move across their space towards where the target stick is. And again, rewarding them when they do touch that. This gets the bird physically involved, but it also teaches them that as they're moving towards it, this is going to be mutually beneficial to them because that reward is coming. So again, we're giving them clarity. I want you to move over here and touch the target. And the bird is going to understand what's being asked of them in that moment. So really, once they get what the target is, and they know it's nothing scary, we can really use it to encourage the parrot to start moving closer towards us.
So with the target stick, just like what we were doing with introducing the treat, is another tool that you can use, and you should use, to accommodate your bird to being safe with your hand.
Yeah.
A lot of people use the target stick, especially at first, because it is just introducing your hand. And of course, I don't know if we want to dive to the nitty gritty, but you can manipulate the actual target stick length in your hand. But I don't know if we want to cover too much of that right now.
Yeah, I think the goal here is
Just to give a basic, right.
To get people comfortable using the tools.
Of course.
And I think the hardest part of all of our conversations in this podcast so far is that we feel like we get really repetitive in encouraging people to go slow and be patient. But again, we're just going to encourage people to see the value in going step by step, because you're looking at a bird that's going to live years and years and years, hopefully, with you. So taking 4 weeks to even get the target stick introduced is completely acceptable and okay. What our philosophy is at Parrot Stars, and what one of our many missions is to try to eliminate the expectation of a bird owner that they're going to get bit. That getting bit is just part of the process of bird ownership. And that does not have to be the experience, and it does not have to be the expectation. So by using these tools, by really taking the time to understand what clicker training is and why it's so useful, you're not even putting yourself in a position where you could get bit. The target stick and your positive reinforcement training sessions are going to set you up for future, more complex tasks with your bird in a way that, again, is basically going to eliminate any chance that you're going to get bit unexpectedly.
Right.
So use the tools systematically and thoughtfully and get used to them so that when we're going to talk about in future episodes, like how to now build upon what we've just mentioned, you're ready for those next more complex stages. So don't underestimate the value of like using that target stick for a week, 2 weeks, just getting your bird to move around within its cage. And I think it's just a great reminder that like you don't have to be scared of your parrot. Like,
Yes.
it is far more scared of you than you are of it. So just you can use these concepts to protect yourself and to protect your parrot and create a really long-lasting, loving relationship with the bird.
Right. And the target stick, going off what you just said, because a lot of people do experience sort of behavior when they are first introducing the target stick, is it's not something, it's just a tool to get your bird
Yeah.
to move like from point to point. It's not a toy. It's not
Mhm.
something you're putting a piece of food on or
Oh,
like a
yeah, that's a good
fruit.
point. Mhm.
So it's not a tool to hold the food to get your bird to come over. It's, you don't really want to encourage a behavior if your bird's really curious and comes over and
Yes.
like
Starts
grabs it
ripping
and
it
yanking
apart.
it and
Yeah.
takes a big old bite. Just try to take the stick away. Don't verbalize anything. Don't react. Just take it out of the bird's reach.
Such a good point.
And you're only reinforcing and rewarding behavior of like your bird is just a light touch or maybe
Exactly.
a little light grab on the tip of the stick. That's our goal here.
Really good reminder. Yes.
And that's why it gets really important to journal what happened during a training session, record your observations physically if you're comfortable doing that. For myself, with every bird I train with, I set up a little selfie stick tripod, physically record what I'm doing.
On your phone. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then I watch it back afterwards. And it's also my timer because I can keep an eye on how long I'm there with the bird. But watching it back really informs my decision making for the next training session. Were my goals too ambitious? Or, like you said, maybe the bird was really eager and wanted to like snap the target stick. There are strategies for a bird that's super eager like that, or a bird that's really cautious. So have your goals in mind, review them at the end if you're not comfortable filming yourself, and jot down what worked, what didn't work, or record it and then watch it back. And you're going to be able to observe your posture, your body language, the bird's body language, and what they were receptive to. That can really help us as humans stay on track and
Mhm.
help our training sessions stay on track too. Because we're trying to remember a lot of things. We're trying to juggle all these different tools. If we can watch it back, we can only get better that way.
Yeah. And I think maybe that too is a way of creating an environment in a multi-person household
Mhm.
where there can't be judgment or criticism or backlash about how a clicker training session was done or handled. I think it's really important to record the training sessions. I think there's huge value in that. But it gets a little complex when we have multiple people living in the same household that want to have a positive relationship with the companion parrot. It's hard enough when it's just one person trying to create a bond. It gets a little bit more complicated when there's multiple people.
Mhm.
So again, I don't know if there's like a hard set, like right or wrong way of doing this. I think there is a little bit of value in maybe choosing one person to kind of take the reins and lay that really strong foundation. So maybe the person who's invested the most time and effort into researching positive reinforcement, or the person that's just the most, let's be honest, stress free or calm, composed person in the house that has
Mhm.
more control of their emotions, or just the person that like is just more comfortable with the bird. Okay. So that they can kind of lay the foundation with the clicker training, so that if other people in the household are really motivated, they can kind of step in once the clicker has been established and kind of enter the clicker without multiple people confusing the bird because maybe the clicks aren't happening at the same time by the same people. Maybe you have relationship with the people in the house that everybody can kind of sit together calmly and be really honest with one another, not judgmental, totally relaxed. If that's not the environment of your home, be realistic, be honest, and communicate the best that you can with the other individuals in the house. But maybe then just one person starts the clicker training and kind of lays that foundation. And then we work with the other people in the household once the clicker has really been reinforced and the meaning has been established. So again, we're not here to judge people. We know humans are complex and family dynamics are hard, but there is a lot of value in everybody staying on the same page, moving at the same pace, and communicating before. And like what Ashley was saying, especially after each training session to make sure we're not accidentally undoing all of the hard work that we're trying to do with the bird. So I think we've kind of laid a really great foundation for people to use this as kind of like a recap episode and kind of use it as a way to kind of refer back to in a little bit more concise way to like get started with their clicker training. But just to kind of recap our recap, positive reinforcement is like offering a reward for a behavior we want to see the bird repeat. So the tricky thing about this conversation is we are trying to keep it not super, super detailed about all the really complex topics of training. But there is a difference between positive reinforcement, positive punishment, negative reinforcement, and negative punishment. So really quickly before we finish the episode, Ashley's going to just describe what we do if the bird does a behavior we don't want it to do again. Okay, so we spent a long time describing how to get a parrot to repeat a behavior we want to have it do multiple times. So we're pretty confident people might ask, well, what do I do if the bird moves away from me and does the opposite of what I'm trying to get it to do? So
And again, we don't want to punish. So no positive punishment, which we described at the very beginning. That could be us vocalizing no at the bird. It could be us spraying them with water to disrupt behavior or flicking them in the beak. These are things that create fear. So if our bird's backing away from us, we don't want to start going, no, 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 no at them. That's going to create some confusion there. What's going to be better is to not draw attention to that behavior. Maybe, as we described in an example earlier, if the bird is backing away, bringing that treat up on the other side of the target to encourage them to come forward. If we're seeing a lunging behavior with the bird, again, we don't want to draw attention. We're going to ignore that. We'll be respectful. If that bird is backing away or lunging, maybe we need to back it up a little too, but we're going to ignore and attempt to redirect behavior as well, which I know similarly, if a bird was mouthing on our hand or biting, if we start telling them, no, no bite, don't do that, we're bringing attention to the behavior and then our voice could unintentionally reinforce it. Our voice becomes a soothing element over time. So it's important to be aware when we're verbalizing what we're highlighting with our voice and making sure that we aren't doing things to negatively punish. So we'd want to really make sure that we ignore and redirect undesirable behavior and that we really emphasize that positive reinforcement with them.
Yep. So hopefully everybody kind of has a really good sense after these episodes to a really good idea of how to initiate rebuilding a relationship with an existing parrot or how to really productively start a relationship with a young baby. Because the whole goal here is just to have a good experience with a companion parrot. Hopefully, if you're able to be successful in all of this, you can be somebody that inspires hope in other bird owners. This is definitely a community effort that we're all kind of coming together on. I think the parrot community in the United States and I think abroad too are realizing how much value there is in positive reinforcement training, and that it really, I hate to say it, but it's like the only way to create a really good, strong behavior relationship. Now, positive reinforcement training doesn't have to be necessarily this hardcore like clicker training sessions. You can do positive reinforcement training in other ways, but hands down, this format where it's so structured and so intentional, and there's so much thought and effort put into it, is most likely going to be the way that you see the results the quickest.
Mhm.
Right.
So you might see that, yes, this first month took a long time and it was hard. But month 2, month 3, they start to go super fast because you made the effort to lay that strong foundation and build the confidence mutually. So don't underestimate the value in like doing it in this format. Yes, it can take time and it's a lot of repetition, but it really works. It
Mhm.
really does. So we're going kind of long, but I just wanted to kind of finish this episode with like each of us kind of saying what we've learned during clicker training, because the parrots are learning, but we're learning also. So if you both want to kind of give our listeners some insight to something that you've kind of gained or learned while you've started your clicker training journey with companion parrots.
Yeah. So, in my experience, put on more personal levels to people to kind of relate, is I did live on a farm. And so I worked with tons of what we had was horses and sheep and a donkey and a llama and a bunch of chickens. Now, I didn't really take the time to train the chickens, and when I was little, when I was on the farm, I've learned that over the years that training is sometimes a subconscious thing
Mm-hmm.
that you are always doing with the animal you're working with.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to have the tools. Now, as we just said, the tools are what makes the process well established.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it foundational, concrete. There's billions of studies that show that it works.
Mm-hmm.
But I would just, with my experience in the farm, I'd just train these animals over time, just doing regular things. I would give him some seed. I would give a sugar cube to our donkey.
Mm-hmm.
His name was Sheldon.
Oh,
Kind of miss him. Yeah, he's
Sheldon.
just living the life back at home. The llama, our llama named Janice was really
Oh,
introverted
Janice.
and antisocial. We did have her for the sheep to protect against coyotes. She didn't really do that, and she kind of she doesn't want anything to do with anybody ever. She actually bites the sheep. But
Oh, Janice.
anyways, that's off topic. But what I've learned after coming to Parrot Stars and working with a totally different group of animals,
Mm-hmm.
donkeys and parrots are not very related,
Mm-hmm.
is that simply using the tools is beyond effective in getting results in
Mhm.
basically almost no time. I'm not
Yeah.
encouraging you to rush the process, but it just so happened that using a clicker for the bird I was working with took me literally 3 days
Yep.
for a behavior that's sometimes takes a long time for people that just kind of want their bird to do it, but don't really kind of use the training strategy to encourage it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my experience. It's kind of a basic learning thing, but I think it does relate to a lot of people to encourage using these things that we've spent so much time explaining, because it works.
Yeah. And I think Avery's story should hopefully offer some inspiration for people who don't have experience with companion parrots, because, yes, you have a lot of animal experience, but parrots are very complex
Yeah.
creatures. And it's a great example that, like, if you're motivated and if you take the time to invest in yourself, you can see huge results. I mean, I just walked through the store yesterday and Avery was getting Rascal, who only responds to positive reinforcement training. Like, she
Yeah.
will not do anything that you want her to do unless it is done in a very specific way. And yet Avery's able to handle her with complete and total confidence because he's taken the time to understand the positive reinforcement training. So don't get discouraged if you're like coming to clicker training and you're like, I've never had a bird before. How do I even do this? Like, it doesn't matter what your experience level is. Anybody can start this at any time and be successful.
Yeah.
Not to take, sorry.
No, go
Just
ahead.
one more thing I learned that I
Mhm.
think is important, and we didn't really say too much about it. But going off of my experience with Little Amazing Rascal, is not only does positive reinforcement training kind of, what am I trying to say? Get the results that you would
Mhm.
like to repeat behaviors, but you are also building a bond
Mhm.
with the actual bird itself. You are spending the time working with your bird, so therefore you are getting to know your bird and vice versa. So
Mhm.
that also makes the process easier, and you feel comfortable with the bird,
Yeah.
and that's why it's easy to handle birds of all sizes.
Mhm.
So that's just going off of that. But anyway, sorry, Ashley.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Okay, what have you learned from clicker training?
So I have a lot of experience with clicker training. I've had formal training on how to do this method of training with a variety of animals. Similar to you, though, parrots were brand new to me coming to Parrot Stars. I guess the closest comparison I could make with parrots would be maybe horses when it comes to sensitivity of energy. And for
Mhm.
me, clicker training with parrots has just taught me the value of being in tune with yourself. I
Mhm.
can't express how important that is. If you've been around horses, you know they respond really differently to different people. If the energy is off, they might get startled or run away, or when we're really calm, they're responsive to it. And it's the closest comparison I can make because parrots are very sensitive to our energy too. So when I go into training sessions, if maybe I had a rough morning and then I'm attempting to train with a really sensitive cockatoo at the store,
Yep.
she might not be receptive to what I'm asking. So I always kind of check in with myself. And that is probably one of the biggest things I've learned is the importance of being in tune with yourself from clicker training, specifically with the parrots. Something you coached me on when I began my parrot handling experience was pausing, taking a physical, deep, dramatic breath in front of the birds, like a nice deep breath where your shoulders literally rise and fall in front of you. Um, Even if I am feeling pretty calm and confident in that moment, that physical exhale and deep
Mm.
breath kind of centers you. And then the bird also sees that change in your posture. So, one of my biggest takeaways would definitely be being in tune with what I'm feeling for the success of a given training session.
Right.
Totally. Yeah, and I think just observing you, yeah, you're just the physicality, the way you move with the birds is so much more natural. And there is a learning curve to that. But like having that moment of like the ability to kind of decompress and like settle yourself and then decide, okay, like, am I going to keep going or are we done now? And then that kind of like goes into what I think I've learned. I think that both of you know I'm a little bit of a workaholic and I have a lot of like big dreams and goals for Parrot Stars. And I'm so inspired daily by the parrots that we work with. And I want to see them succeed. And I want to continue to like grow their abilities. But the hardest thing for me and the thing that I've learned the most is like what we've mentioned in this episode is like the value in seeing the little wins.
Mhm.
That something for me was something really, really hard for me because like I have a lot of confidence in handling parrots. Like I'm not afraid of them and I'm not nervous around them. So I was kind of going into this more structured format of training, not afraid.
Mhm.
And it took me a lot of time to realize like it doesn't matter how confident I am. This is about the parrot and like building their confidence. And even though I'm ready to do another 16 minutes of training, that doesn't mean that they want to do another 16 minutes of training. So when we're suggesting like the 3 to 5 minutes, like I really can confidently say, like, we're suggesting that because it really does work. Like in the times that I've been doing this training, having 3 minute training sessions a couple times a day was so much more beneficial than when I started with Rascal 6 years ago, where I was like doing 20 to 30 minute training sessions. And it wasn't that I was doing anything that was intentionally wrong or I was trying to push her more than she was ready for. It was just that those remaining 15 minutes were not productive anymore. Like it's been so much more successful to have a 3-minute session with her that has realistic goals, that she's enjoying the whole time, that I'm enjoying the whole time, and be able to end on that positive note. And I think that was something, and to be totally truthful, like when I was starting this process and learning how to train, like I wasn't always ending on a positive note. Like I didn't get bit. The bird wasn't like flailing and flying away from me, but I didn't feel like it was a victory. I was just like, meh. Didn't really get where I wanted to be. And just like, I felt that there was kind of like that tension or like that frustration on my part. And so that was really, really difficult for me to kind of work out of and change in myself is like, okay, think about what you're trying to achieve in this session. We're going to set a timer, 3 minutes. And if it's shorter than 3 minutes because something else is going on and it's just there's distractions, let's always try to end on a positive note. And that has been really, really valuable. And I think that's where we've gotten to the point, like with Rascal, that like she can so consistently go to people. And you can ask like other people who have known Rascal for the first 6 years, like there was no way I would have ever taken that bird to an elementary school and let kindergartners hold her. Like there was no way. So it's because we've kind of really slowed things down and I've allowed her to kind of grow with me to say, okay, you have a choice every single time. And I think because she knows she has a choice, she's a lot less nervous and she actually does it even better and more consistently than I would have ever thought she would because she knows she can say no. And sometimes she does.
Yeah. It's funny when
Sometimes she's
she
over
steps
it.
up. It might just be like the human perception, like my own way of seeing it. But when she does step up, and she'll say step up like almost every time, it seems at the end when she says it, there's like that little question flare. When she
Mhm.
says step up like that, and you're like,
It's
yeah, it's time to,
so
and she
true.
does, and it's really cool because I mean, over the years, of course, she's learned that, but she's thinking about it.
True. Because we kind of pose it like a question for
Yeah,
her.
and she
Like, you
says,
want to come out? Like,
yeah,
you're asking them, you're allowing them to be active participants. So that's funny because the cool thing about parrots is that they talk back to us. So
well, yeah, that's cool.
they do mimic your inflections. And it is so funny. Like, I never really thought about that, but you're so right. Like, she totally does say
She's
that
just,
phrase in the
yeah.
form of a question
So
because that's
she's
how we're
taking it
saying
slow.
it.
She's
Yeah.
making sure you know what you're doing.
Like, are you sure you want me to step up? Are you going to hold your hand still? That's really funny. But, well, thank you guys both so much for your participation always and giving our listeners some really, really good information about how to start their process with their bird. I think the honesty is really valuable. I think being super transparent is something we pride ourselves in at Parrot Stars. So thank you for both of you for always being really honest and direct with our customers and now our podcast listeners as well. So as always, if any of our listeners want more information or you want us to deep dive into certain topics, you guys can always send us an email. We're happy to take suggestions or answer things in more detail. And then, as always, if you can rate or review our podcast or download it or share it, any kind of feedback we get on the podcast is really beneficial and helpful. So, yeah, if you guys want to participate in clicker training, you can find out more information through this podcast or continue to listen to future episodes because I'm sure we'll deep dive into it even more. So, all right.
As always, be kind to your parrot and it'll be kind to you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.